Hello and welcome to this current events topic. I say current events because things people talk about on the news today, although it goes back to history, 1787, the Constitutional Convention. In 2020, we see a lot of situations with people, mobs, people. And are you heroic when you stand up in the face of a mob? I would say yes. In a federal republic, a union of states, 50 states, we want to follow things according to the law. If you don't like certain things, you get it passed. You get the legislature or the city council or the U.S. Congress to pass the law. So we preface by saying we don't support mob rule of any bent, right wing, middle wing, left wing. You know what I'm saying? But we do see these out of control mobs going around attacking Confederate statues, desecrating them and whatnot. And then we saw an orderly, so to speak, process in New Orleans, Louisiana 3 years ago, where the city government, city council voted to remove Confederate statues. Robert E. Lee, P.G.T. Beauregard, Jefferson Davis, and so on. You may favor that, you may oppose it. You may not care. I've talked to some people that say they don't care either way. Okay, well, but a thing I hear a lot in the newspaper, on television and radio is that the Confederate leaders were traitors and they should not be honored because they committed treason against the United States government, and they were fighting to protect slavery and all these kind of things you hear all the time. So I made a video a couple of days ago, but I didn't like the way I had mixed two topics. And I said, no, I want to just stick to one topic. I think it's better that way. Plus, I made one statement that I didn't agree with. I don't like to edit it because then it looks like I'm trying to cover something up. So I just said I'll reshoot it. I'm going to say the same thing anyway, more or less. So this video will show a series of facts. It's not opinion. It's not me saying, well, I favor a certain side, so that's the way I think about it, which is fine. People should be able to make opinion videos. But this day and age, it's not necessarily always going to be allowed. So you hear the topic commonly about slavery. I don't think too many people in the modern world, modern America at least, support the institution of slavery. We have modern 21st century sensibilities. We think people should be free. And then you got myself coming from a libertarian, sort of paleo-conservative libertarian background. We believe in free enterprise, freedom of association, freedom, equal protection under the law. And so we think people should be free to do what they want. Okay. But of course, this is 2020. I guess I should have broadcast this through StreamYard so people could join if they want to counterpoint what I'm saying. They could write the counterpoint. But of course, anyway, we could always make a separate follow-up video where people could present their counterpoint. And like I always say on this channel, you got 30 minutes uninterrupted. You have to use your real face, real name, watch your language, and otherwise, other than that, you can say whatever you want. And I may agree, and I may offer a rebuttal. So we know the Confederate States of America was established in 1861 following this secession movement, which started in 1860 with South Carolina. And it seems to be like this pivotal thing that the whole United States revolves around. In other words, these arguments that continue on now here 155 years later. 155 years ago. No one is alive today from then. No one's grandparents are alive from then. But I guess if you're 100 years old, you might have a grandparent who was there, but they're not alive. The last soldier in that war died, that we know of, or at least died in 1959, 61 years ago. So, can't interview anybody. I remember when they had many World War I veterans. They weren't even not really old. See them at the grocery store, whatever, could drive around in their 70s. Then, they died away. Same thing with World War II. Time marches on. So, we look at it. And you'll just have to trust that what I'm reading is correct. And I'm not going to lie. So when we go back to 1776, 1775, the war started. 76, the American colonies, their independence from Great Britain, tore down the statue of King George III in New York City, which many of the people opposing the tearing down the monuments would support that because they say, well, he was a bad guy, you know. And they tore down his lead statue and made bullets out of it. Pointed that out to some people. I don't think they took it too well, but I'll say what you thought was good, now you think it's bad. But I mean, we don't support that kind of thing. All right, so I suppose a person could make a very strong argument that the Patriots of 1776 could make a strong case that they committed treason because they had all taken an oath of loyalty to King George III, and then they revolted against him. Now, the counterpoint would be they said, oh, he violated his social contract by doing all these nefarious things. But if you examine that closely, nefarious things like issuing a 1 penny tax to pay for these wars against France, not exactly what we would consider egregious, right? A 1 penny tax. Now people happily pay 15% tax on their income. Well, I don't know if they happily do it, but they do it without a revolt. And sales tax, inheritance tax, excise taxes of every sort. So these are very minimal taxes, 1775. And we're not going to get into that too much, but, you know, they say, oh, it was taxation without representation. That violates our law or whatever. Well, it wasn't a law. Anyway, it was just a novel idea. The colonies were virtually self-governing anyway. The British had a very benevolent rule over them. In fact, if you study the colonial days, the involvement of the British government in the internal affairs of the colonies was very minimal. And from the way I can see it, from what I can tell, they just were looking for a pretext to break away. That was their intention to break away all along. They just were looking for a pretext, an excuse. Doesn't really hold water when you look at it carefully. But anyway, that's another story. Voltron says, hi, Ron. Sounds like a subject I'd like. Hope I didn't come in at the end again. No, it's the beginning. Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter because the British lost the war with the help of France, Spain, and the Netherlands. Without their help, the American colonies very likely would have lost. They were banking on that because they knew that France, Spain, and the Netherlands were looking to get revenge against the British anyway because of previous wars. And they were willing to make deals with people that had been the enemy only a few years before. Water. So they made the Articles of Confederation, a union, which went into effect 1781, the first constitution, if you want to call it that. A perpetual union. Wasn't too long though. 6 short years, the leaders say, oh, it's not working, it's not working. There was some problems. We have to amend the, and the British just threw in the towel anyway on calling it a treason because they recognized the United States as a legitimate country in 1783. They knew when to cut their losses, so they just say, oh, well, let them go, let them go. And that's it. We move on, the British attitude, we move on down the road. All right. In fact, their thinking was probably more like, we'll team up with them. We have a plan to run this operation anyway, meaning the progress of the entire world. Be very helpful to enlist the United States. And then you have things like the Monroe Doctrine, the open door policy in China, and so on, which were presented by the US government, but actually developed by the British government. True story. You may not believe it, but it's true. There's no doubt about that. And of course, when the British Empire found themselves in some pickles or a fix, a bad situation, 1914, 1939, who did they go to bail them out? Their American wayward child. So that's a peculiar situation, to say the least. But that's, like I said, another story. Let's go with the story at hand, where the Confederate leaders, traitors. Now, they say this in the newspaper, radio, television all the time, and there really isn't much challenge to it. But I did read an article today in the New Orleans Times-Picayune, an opinion piece where the guy was saying, no, they weren't traitors, no, but he didn't really explain it so well. Guess you have a limited space, so he couldn't present a video in the newspaper. So I went to this website, thoughtco.com. It's just different, apparently, ideas or topics about the Constitution, and it would be questions. What did the Constitution say about this or that? So this topic, which is pertaining to the hangout right now, is what does the Constitution say about slavery? Okay, so we go to 1770. Well, let's go to 1781, because they declared independence, but they, of course, had to form a government, which they started working on Articles of Confederation, and then they had to ratify it. So it was all ratified 1781 in effect. Of course, it wasn't totally in effect till they won the Independence War, and that was done in 83 with the Treaty of Paris ratified by both sides, the British Parliament and the United States Congress, which was a single house Congress then. Half the states allowed slavery. Maryland, Virginia, Maryland, I want to go in order. Maryland, Delaware, top to bottom. Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, right? Georgia. Now later they added Kentucky, Tennessee. As the U.S. went westward, as the territories were filled out and settled, Alabama, Mississippi. That's 10. Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana 11. Arkansas 12. Missouri, after the Missouri Compromise, not going to be talked about in this video, 13. And Texas 14, with the war against Mexico 14. The states north of the Mason-Dixon line, the two guys who had that surveying company that surveyed and drew that line. That's why the line between Maryland and Pennsylvania is like straight all the way across, You ever looked at that? From that circle in Delaware all the way west was the Mason-Dixon line. Well, that line had nothing to do with slavery, really. It was just they wanted to make a boundary for Pennsylvania and Maryland, and they surveyed it and they did the line. It just so happens that north of the line, those states were slowly phasing out slavery. The topography there wasn't very amenable to slavery anyway, and plantation economy, it was more amenable to small farming. So the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and later Maine. Maine was added as a state in 1820. Missouri, 1821. Sorry, I say 1820. 2020. Remember, Maine was part of Massachusetts. A lot of people don't realize that. Maine was just a Massachusetts territory that was allowed to become its own state. The Northwest Territories, that's north of the Ohio River, west of Pennsylvania. They organized those in the 1780s with the Northwest Ordinance. And they agreed they're not going to allow slavery in those territories. The southern states never objected to that because they didn't care either way. Didn't matter to them. So they say, oh, well, fine. Total agreement by the United States to make the Northwest Territory free, meaning no slavery allowed. And then as people populated that area, it became states. Ohio, 1803. Then Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and later on Minnesota. Then Iowa, part of the Louisiana territory, Purchase territory, became a free state, no contention there. Really, there was no argument about it. The northern states say, well, whatever they want to do in the south doesn't make any difference to us. And then the southern states say, whatever they want to do in the north doesn't make any difference to us. So it's peaceful until 1787. That's where the problems started to come into play. Remember, I don't have StreamYard on, so you can't join this hangout. I should have done that, but you can just make the comments. And then, like I say, you could do a follow-up rebuttal or whatever. But these are facts. They're not really opinions. I don't know how you rebut a fact. That doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, so they had the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. And then the Constitution was approved in 88. There was a lot of general agreement, but then there was some disagreements. General agreement. We'll have a two-house Congress. House of Representatives for population, and the Senate representing each state. Every state gets the same number of senators, 2 per state. That was a compromise between the tiny states with low population like Delaware, Rhode Island, and the big states like Virginia and New York, which had a huge population. So to have a unicameral house, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. It wasn't really fair to the big states. In the original Constitution, every state got a vote, 1 vote in the Congress, 13 members of Congress. But I mean, a little tiny state like Rhode Island could veto everything because you couldn't even change the Constitution unless it was unanimous, right? So they agreed with the new Constitution. Well, you could amend it if it was a 3/4 majority. If 3/4, 75% of the states agreed to it. And if 2/3, the first 2/3 of both houses of Congress had to approve it, then the states had to agree. Not easy to amend it, but you could do it. It's been done over 20 times. Okay. I'm going to go get a drink, and then I'll be right back. And then we'll continue on to the problem areas, the contention, the real contention. Okay, I have the drink. Second beer of the day. Not quite a full beer because this is not 12 ounces, this glass. It's close, but it's not quite. So get a little bit more. That'll be the second. That'll make the second beer. I always drink 4 on the day off. Not always, just usually. All right. Magnum, people will slag on it and say it's a malt liquor, Well, malt liquor just means stronger than average beer. That doesn't mean anything. And I think if you evaluate it fairly, you'll find that Magnum premium malt liquor introduced in 1981 is probably a little bit better than your average American style lager. I think so. It's got a little more flavor, a little more character, a little more hop action. I don't know. The IBUs aren't high, but Voltron says, if you remember the table of nations in the book of Genesis, did the ancient Mesopotamians view countries as birthing each other? Example, the United States coming from Great Britain. If so, we could trace the USA to one of the peoples mentioned in the table of nations. Well, you probably could do that, but we don't have time to go back that far. You could sort of trace that back. Ham, Shem, and Japheth, really. The 3 sons of Noah, because Noah had a wife and 3 sons, and they had three wives. I mean, each son had a wife. Then you have your 3 races and all of that. But anyway, that's off the topic. It's like guys related, right? They worked out the population compromise fairly easily. The House of Representatives would be an advantage to the large states. The bigger your population, the more representatives you get. Makes sense, right? The Senate protects the small states because the state gets 2 votes, regardless of how tiny or large it is. Both houses have to pass a bill to become a law. Makes sense. Supreme Court, some people were wary of that. The anti-federalists said, you're making a government that's too powerful, too powerful. Got a Supreme Court, it's going to be like some hierarchical, like in the Roman Empire days, this tribunal of elites that are going to override everything. And they say, no, no, no. I have the Federalist Papers over there, all of them. Oh, no, no, no. Don't worry about that, because the Congress can restrict their appellate jurisdiction, which they never do today. But they could do it. You know, the Congress likes the Supreme Court because then they can say, well, they made a ruling. But most Americans don't know the Constitution, so they can't tell the Congress, yeah, but you could restrict their rulings. You can literally restrict their appellate jurisdiction. The Congress created, you know, the Congress has precedence over the president and the Supreme Court. But they don't like to do that because they don't want to have to face any, you know, they don't want to have to answer to anybody. You know, I know how these politicians are. You probably know too. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into the weeds. My question was Great Britain listed among those. Oh, no. I mean, there was no Great Britain in the days of Babylon. Europe was the woods, you know. That's why the Iraqis said in 2003, you're going to attack us? We had cities with temples, canals, and an organized, highly developed society, and you were living in huts made out of twigs. Which is true, actually. Okay. Here's where the contention came. Now, matches burn. Yeah, there's a huge difference in how the government is supposed to work and how it actually does today. Federal government agencies get to make regulation or laws without Congress. So the Supreme Court is able to legislate from the bench. Yeah, because they're allowed to, not because they're able to, really. Well, those regulations are based in law because they create laws that give the executive branch the power to regulate certain things. We can question that. We can talk about that later. I agree with basically your whole basis on that. But they're not doing it illegally, really, because they're allowed to regulate as per the law. Like the Food and Drug Act, the Meat Inspection Act, the Bottled and Bond Act, 1897, all that. Here's where the problem came about. And this is important because I think many Americans are very ignorant of the Constitution, and they don't understand. It's like they think, I don't know what they're thinking, that the northern states were saying, get rid of slavery, and the southern states were saying, no, no. This is not the case. The northern states were slowly phasing out the institution of slavery, some faster than others. New Jersey did it very slowly. In fact, there were slaves in the northern states in the 1700s. But it was being phased out. And then they passed the slave importation part of the Constitution. Let's look at that in these documents. Article 1, Section 2 is well, let's go down to Article 1, Section 9 first. Let's jump down. I'm looking at the Constitution online. You know, they got the whole text. It's the U.S. government wrote the text. This is constitution.congress.gov. The United States government put this on the website. Just like in Canada, you can look at the Constitution of Canada on the website. And it won't be your opinion. It won't be people saying you're saying that. No, no, the government of Canada says it. I'm reading off their website, man. Okay. Here it is. This is clear. I'm reading. I'm not changing it. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing meaning like Virginia and South Carolina, shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, 1808. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person. So what the Constitution says, we can't make a law outlawing the importation of slaves. They never used the word slavery in the whole Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, but they used terminology alluding to it because they didn't like to use the word. They felt uncomfortable with it. It was like a politically incorrect term then, even then. Okay, they want to be very delicate. The migration or importation of such persons, meaning slaves, cannot be prohibited basically until 1808. But the Congress can pass a $10 tax for each person coming in. Did anyone take issue with that? No. The southern states said, yeah, we kind of want to phase that out ourselves. No more slave importation. So in 1808, as soon as that year came in, as soon as the year arrived, the Congress immediately outlawed the importation of slavery. You could still have slavery in the state, but they could never bring any more in. Now, did some people violate the law and still sneak them in? Yeah, it's illegal to sell cocaine, but people do it today. There's only so much you can do. My brother, who is a Baltimore City cop, was stabbed 3 days ago for being a white and a cop. I'm outraged. Okay, sorry to hear that. And forgive my ignorance, but wasn't one of the plans by either Lincoln or the federal government to try to get freed slaves to be exiled to Liberia? No, that was a project that was started by liberals in the North and the South prior to the war. They wanted to get rid of slavery and to ship all black people to Africa. And they set up Liberia, as an American protected country. The capital was named Monrovia, still Monrovia today, after James Monroe, who was a slave owner, but the president of the United States for 8 years, one of the founding fathers, who did favor actually phasing out slavery, as did Thomas Jefferson and all the rest. Now, there was only one little problem. They raised all this money and they had this big ad campaign, but there weren't too many black people that were freed that were interested in going live in the Guinea coast of Africa. A few did, but most of the people said, yeah, thanks for the offer, but I think I'll just stay in the United States. You hear the modern liberals talk about America's so bad, it's terrible. Yeah, that's why they wanted to stay, because it was so bad and terrible. They had a free ride to go to Africa with all the other black people. And they were saying, no, thanks. Okay, prayers for you and your family, Kevin. I pray that your heart and mind doesn't fall into anger and hatred, says Voltron. The Western civilization was the first to end slavery. And that's true. Okay, now. It was so hot today. It is hot today. I cut the grass. Came out nice though. All right, now. So that's no contention there. I brought it up, but there's no contention. Now let's go back to the contention. The 3/5 compromise. Article. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. And then they go on and on about what states they're talking about. Now, a lot of these modern liberals will say, oh, they only consider black people 3/5 of a person. No, it isn't what they said. Here's the contention. The southern states, now remember, all these states want as much power in the Congress as possible. The southern states say, oh, we want to count all our people, because then you get more people in Congress. Therefore, you get more representation. Now, I'm talking about the House. Now, the northern states, rightfully so, said, hold on a minute. What do you mean, all the people? They said, well, everybody lives in a state. And the northern states said, you mean slaves too? They can't even vote. They're not even considered citizens. The southerners say, oh, yeah, but they live here, so we'll count them. And the northern states said, no, you shouldn't be able to count any of them. The southern states naturally said, no, we want to count all of them, 100%. Oh, they went round and round on this. So they said, well, let's make a deal. How about this? You can count 60% of the total. So if your state has 100,000 slaves, you can count 60,000 of them in your representation in Congress. Ooh, the southern states said, oh, that's a deal, because they might have figured they weren't going to get any representation for those slaves. We'll take the deal. So they put it in the Constitution. That argument was over. It wasn't brought up until recently with all these hysterical people running around talking about, they only counted as 3/5 of a person, 3/5 of a person. Listen, the northern states wanted to count you as 0% of a person. It had nothing to do with anything except representation in Congress. Read your history. You want to talk business? Let's talk business. Now, here's some other controversies. Well, that's the main ones. Other than that, that was it. Essentially, or initially, no northern states were saying, now, you got to get rid of slavery in a certain amount of time. No one ever mentioned it. And the southern states weren't saying, we're going to keep it forever. You got it? No one ever mentioned that. It was not an issue, essentially. Well, now, but time goes on. And it starts to become an issue with radicals showing up onto the scene. The abolitionists, who are considered heroes today. And then Matt Burns talking about Africans enslaving Africans. Yeah, I know, right? They just went over there and bought them. It's not like the movie Roots where they went out in the jungle with a gang of white guys and captured all the slaves. They would have been all, they would have been killed. It was like going to a store, they went and bought them. You say, that's terrible. I know, whoever said it wasn't terrible, but that's what they did. Lincoln was extremely racist. He wanted black people to be sent to South America. Well, actually Africa or wherever, but out of here. There's no doubt about that. Lincoln, very clearly stated that he did not believe that black people should ever be given equal rights in America. Secondly, he said he intended that the white man would be supreme in America. And the whole Republican Party basically wanted slavery forbidden from the Western territories because they wanted it to be an all-white area. And they even used terminology like, we don't want the West to be Africanized. And that's what brings to this. The Louisiana Purchase started the unraveling because remember, the western border of the United States was the Mississippi River. North of the Ohio River, no slavery. No one cared, no one objected. The Southwest territories, Alabama, Mississippi, and then later Louisiana, but they allowed slavery. No argument, no contention. The Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana became a slave state, but they always allowed slavery there. So no one cared. Okay. Arkansas. Okay. Now Missouri. Now it's a problem. Really, it was a problem because you had 15-15. You had an equal number of slave states and free states in the Senate. And all the states were paranoid about being overridden because northern states had a different interest. They were more into commerce, international finance, capitalism, building big cities like New York, Cleveland, Detroit, and all that. The southern states focusing on agriculture. and internal government. You know, the southern states generally, with the Democratic Party, did not want federal funding of highways. It was a big argument back then. No, because then they'll control your state. The northern states, the Whig Party, say, oh yeah, we need to have a national coordination of the country, like Henry Clay from Kentucky, pro-slavery, but pro-union. You know, Henry Clay, he had the American system. He wanted the northern states and the southern states to be brought together as a big, happy, functioning imperial union. Okay. So, Missouri. Naturally, the southern states said, we want it to be a slave state. And the Missouri people were saying, yeah. The northern states said, no, it's going to cause an imbalance. Well, they compromised. They said, how about this? Maine wants to break away from Massachusetts anyway. We can let Maine come in as a free state and let Missouri come in as a slave state, and that'll even the balance, and nobody will fight over it. So everybody said, okay, fine. And that was it. Missouri Compromise. No problem. Everything south of Missouri, their border, slavery allowed. Everything north of the southern border of Missouri, assuming you ever take over any land, free. So if when Iowa became a state, there was not a shred of argument that it was going to be a free state. It was always assumed it would be a free state. Missouri, part of the Louisiana Purchase, always going to purchase a free state. No argument. Well, then they had the war against Mexico. Texas joined the United States. Well, that was a big controversy. Oh, big controversy went on and on. Well, they said, well, oh, hell, Texas can be a slave state. That was one of the reasons Texas had a war with Mexico, because Mexico didn't allow slavery and the Texans wanted slavery. The Mexicans said everybody has to be Catholic, even though Mexico itself was only nominally Catholic. They were Masonic than Catholic, but the Texans say, oh, no, we want to be Catholic. So that caused trouble. And a lot of other things too. So then Texas became an independent country, wanted to be a state off the bat, but then they became a state 9 years later. Okay. No big argument, but here's where the argument came. As the West developed with new states, you see new states like Kansas. Well, they'd always just figure Kansas be a free state. It's above the line. Arizona and New Mexico, eventually they'll be slave states. They below the line. No real arguments. Then Stephen Douglas comes along. Now you see Stephen Douglas, a big time Democrat. We call him ultra conservative today. Okay, let's look at these comments. The ironic thing, you have to say Missouri right. Missouri, yeah. Lincoln was a white separatist. Well, he wasn't a separatist, so to speak. He didn't want to set up a white country necessarily. If you have 100 guys you need to feed and raise from infants, it's cheaper to just buy a steam engine and have a group of 5 guys running it. Slavery would have stopped on its own anyways. The South is not racist. Talk about General Custer and how he genocided out West. Well, Custer, he gets unfair treatment because he wrote a good article about when he testified, really testifying to Congress about how the government was causing all of those problems. When is slavery going to end? Yeah, Johnny Ringo. Thought it ended, but it seemed like it didn't. All right, I'm going to go get a little bit more drink. I'm not going to exceed my limit. Then I'll just drink water, which is good. Water's good. All right. Now, Stephen Douglas kind of opened a can of worms because he said he had a lot of railroad interests out there in Kansas and everything, and in Chicago, Illinois. So he said, well, what are we going to do? He upset the apple cart because Stephen Douglas said, well, let's let Kansas vote whether they want to be slave or not. popular sovereignty. Let the people decide. Oh, well, everybody's trying to pressure Kansas to be a free state or a slave state, and a lot of trouble broke out there. And then all these controversies with that, because then the Northerners say, wait, I thought that was already settled, that north of the line they wouldn't have slavery, and south of the line they could if they wanted to. And now you're saying popular sovereignty. So then they had the Lincoln Douglas debates, fussing about all of that. And then Douglas said, well, I mean, he said it doesn't really matter anyway, because out west, the land isn't really geared towards slavery anyway. So even if they have it legally, it's not going to really exist. And so the Southerners got mad at him, and they were saying, you don't support slavery. Well, he didn't support slavery. He just wanted to get to be president of the United States, what he wanted to be. And then the Northerners are saying, you know, what are you doing? You're allowing slavery out west, which means black people out west. And we very clearly, the Free Soilers said, we very clearly do not want to Africanize the West. We want it to be an all-white territory. You say, what about the Indians? Well, they had plans for them. But anyway, so Douglas, all he succeeded in doing was alienating Northerners and Southerners. And when he ran for president, he got beat very badly. But they did compromise with the Great Compromise of 1850, which kind of settled the Western contention. But Douglas was correct. I mean, really, he was right. It wasn't going to work out west. Might have worked in New Mexico and Arizona and Southern California. Could have worked there. Plantations, you know, big farms with irrigation and all, but it wasn't going to work in Montana and Wyoming, you know. So here's where the real trouble started. So we're going back to where they traitors, where the Confederates traitors. That's the whole topic of the video. I actually have a huge order of liquor that I ordered that's on the way. Don't want to go out in the nearest liquor store is far away. South Carolina alcohol laws are such an annoyance. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We don't have too many strict laws here in Louisiana. Okay, now let's go back to the abolitionists, a real thorn in the side. You had radicals, and I mean extremists, like William Lloyd Garrison up there in Boston, with the Unitarian movement, Unitarian, these Unitarians. They were like radical, a radical development of the Puritans. They believed in a unitary God. They rejected the Trinity. They basically rejected the Bible. They believed in a liberal interpretation of the Bible, more like liberation theology. Heavily, you know, Masonic thinking. You know what I'm saying? Enlightenment thinking. Let's call it that. And it's true. You just say, well, I don't like those terms. Well, it's true. Just read about their history. Enlightenment thinking. They're like Voltaire of New England. You know what I'm saying? And they kind of admired the radicalism of the French Revolution and all these kind of things. So Thomas Paine would be a good example in the South, another radical. Well, William Lloyd Garrison, he says, I'm going to burn the United States Constitution in Boston. I think it was in downtown Boston. He burned the Constitution. People said, are you crazy? And he started that newspaper. What was it? The Liberator. He said the United States Constitution should be burned because it allows slavery. So the Constitution itself is evil. So he said, well, slavery is evil. This is William Lloyd Garrison. He said, well, if slavery is legal, if slavery is evil and the United States Constitution protects slavery, which it clearly did, then that makes the Constitution evil. So he burned it. Now you say, well, how did it protect slavery? What are you talking about, nut? Well, let's read the Constitution. No protection in free states. Article 4, Section 2. Very, very important. Very, very important. All the states agreed to this. Every single state, all 13 colonies which became states agreed to this. No one did not agree to it. Article 4, Section 2. Very important. Learn your Constitution. How about that? Let's read it, shall we? Well, there's different paragraphs, but the third paragraph. Here we go. No person held to service or labor in one state, meaning slaves. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof. Let's say, for example, Georgia. No held to service in Georgia under Georgia law, escaping into another. Well, let's make it easier. Let's say Delaware. No person held to service or labor in Delaware under Delaware law, escaping into another, say like New Jersey, a free state, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Now, there's no getting around this. This is not my opinion. This is the law. This is the Constitution. I didn't write the Constitution. I wasn't born, you know. Nope. So let's convert it. No person held in Delaware under Delaware law, escaping into New Jersey, in consequence of any law or regulation in New Jersey, you know, regardless of the law in New Jersey or the regulation in New Jersey, that's immaterial. So New Jersey could pass a law, all right? New Jersey could pass a law saying, well, if a slave escapes here, he can't be sent back. Wouldn't matter. The law would immediately be unconstitutional. It would be invalid, have no validity. Shall be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So the slave owner could write a letter to New Jersey and say, look, so-and-so is a slave. He escaped. I want him back, or I want her back. Under the Constitution, New Jersey had to send the person back, whether they liked it or not, or whether they thought it was wrong or not. That's why William Lloyd Garrison burnt the Constitution, because he said the Constitution is evil because it has this provision in there. The Southern states say, well, too bad for you. The Constitution is in effect and you got to follow it. And if your kind of ideas get a hold, we got a problem. Well, the abolitionists did get a hold. They became more and more popular. Their movement grew. And more people around the North started to adhere to that theology, I guess you call it, that ideology. So then you had the Underground Railroad helping, you know, which was a network of safe houses helping slaves escape to the North. You say, well, was that unconstitutional? It was clearly illegal and unconstitutional because it violated the Constitution, right? So the Southerners took issue with this. They say, look, we know they got people in the North allowing slaves to escape. Now, if they run to Canada, if they get to Canada, we can't do anything about it. We don't control Canada. Canada's not under the Constitution of the United States. So if they can make it to Canada, they're safe. Can't get them. Unless they could send a bounty hunter up there to catch them and send them back, which did happen on occasion. Send a bounty hunter up there, catch a slave in Canada, sneak him out the country, bring him back to the U.S. Very risky, because if the Canadians caught you doing that, meaning the British government caught you doing that, they're going to put you in prison. So the Southerners did hire bounty hunters to go into Wisconsin, New York, find out, okay, those people got this guy held, meaning they're protecting him from being captured. Snatch the guy, bring him back. Now, but what they really could do is just go to the courthouse and say, we know that this guy's a slave and we have paperwork and he has to go back. Originally, they would send him back. No question. Go back. Go home. Go away. But as the abolitionist movement grew and grew and grew, pretty soon you had northern states saying, we're not sending them back. The southern states said, no, you're going to send them back, because that's the Constitution. We have the law on our side, which they clearly did. There's no I don't care how liberal you are, how enlightened you are, or whatever you are, they had the Constitution on their side. Now, can you amend the Constitution? Yeah, but the Constitution was on their side. Even Lincoln or any, none of them would have contested that, nor did they ever contest it. And in fact, part of the compromise of 1850 was pass a stronger, more powerful fugitive slave law, a fugitive slave law, saying this is the law of the United States. The U.S. Marshals are going to enforce it. And you had instances in the 1850s where U.S. Marshals go bust open, raid a house and say, we know the slaves here. It's the law. And they're going back to Alabama or wherever they came from. And people would be in an uproar. They said, we don't care if you're in an uproar. That's the law, based on the Constitution. Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but that's the law. But it got to a point where in the northern states, they just said, well, we're not going to follow the law. We don't care what the law says. If the slaves escape to Ohio, we're going to let them stay. Then you had even more extreme radicals. Let me get some water, okay? Thank you. Then you have extreme radicals like John Brown, the psychopath. A psychopath, a cult leader. If you're going to admire John Brown, you may as well admire Jim Jones and Charles Manson, basically. He's like a messiah, Oh, I'm a messiah. I'm going to kill slave owners and start a slave uprising in the South. So John Brown and his terrorist organization, which is what it was, did the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, where they attacked a U.S. military post to seize the weapons and give to the slaves to have a slave uprising. They had already had the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831, which got the Southerners very paranoid. So the U.S. military, the Marines, I believe it was the Marines, counterattacked, stormed the base. There was gunfire, a little gun battle, and they captured John Brown. Robert E. Lee was the head of that raid, I believe. And they captured John Brown and put him on trial. I said trial. Trial. And he was executed for treason. Very appropriately, right? You attack a U.S. military base, killing soldiers, and try to foment a national revolt. Yeah, that's kind of like treason. So he was executed. Now, this is what really made the Southerners paranoid, because then you started having liberal abolitionist cities in the North ringing church bells for John Brown's memory and writing poems for John Brown. The Southerners say, wait a minute. Okay, let's look at this. Oh, we got some comments coming in now. Talking about Syria. I don't want to get to that. It's okay. Didn't General Custer lead a massacre to the native? Well, he was really a colonel. He was only a brevet general in the war on the South. In the war against the South, he was just a temporary general. He was never an actual general, just a temporary because they had shortage of generals. No, he didn't really lead massacres against Indians. And in fact, Colonel Custer, George Armstrong Custer, he said that the reason they keep getting caught in these battles is the U.S. government was causing trouble out west. And he was a servant of the government, being in the military. He said, so y'all make bad policy. I've got the article in the book. Y'all make bad policy, and then we're stuck going out there fighting Indians, which we wouldn't be having a battle if you didn't make this bad policy and be out there cheating them all the time, which is what Custer said. But he's in the Army. If the Army sends me out to fight, okay, I'll do what they tell me to do. But that was his testimony. You are making the policy which is causing the fight. If you didn't make the bad policy, I wouldn't be out there fighting. That's after the war against the South, 1870s. Please don't delete this. I look forward to listening this weekend. Thank you. I won't delete it, Craig. I don't think I will. I won't. I disagree. BLM is organized from 3 admitted Marxists. They are a Marxist organization. There's no doubt, but that's another story. All right. Communist organization. I'll give it a listen to. Lincoln's whole cabinet was racist. It was the 1860s. Yeah, right. Republicanism is cuckoldry. Civil War was not over slavery. His cabinet, okay, armed slaves to rape and murder citizens made Abraham. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna get to that. So, well, this is making a very bad situation in the southern states because the Southerners say, well, Thomas Jefferson and those anti-federalists were right after all, because they had warned, don't join the Constitution. It's a trick. We have the Articles of Confederation with a weak central government. We do not want a powerful central government because they will not let you leave. It's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. It's a trick. Don't join it. They're trying to create an empire. This is what the anti-federalists said. If you don't believe me, read the anti-federalist papers. The Federalists, like John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, said, oh, no, it ain't a trick. We just want a strong government. But by 1860, the southern states were saying, no, it really was a trick because we don't want to be part of this anymore. We got people fomenting slave uprisings in the South, people getting murdered. And now we got people in the North celebrating it. And now we have northern states stating very clearly, now you start to have state legislatures saying, we're not going to follow the Fugitive Slave Act. Well, the southern states said, well, what you're saying is you're not going to follow the Constitution. So now they were very paranoid about Lincoln, and probably incorrectly so, because Lincoln never said he was going to get rid of slavery. He only said he didn't want it spreading out west. In fact, one of his compromise proposals after South Carolina seceded and the other states followed them was to get a constitutional amendment passed that would guarantee slavery forever. They don't have that plaque on the Lincoln Memorial, do they? Guarantee slavery forever. Just stay in the country. He's telling the southern states, come on back. Don't leave. We don't want a divorce. We'll pass an amendment saying you can have slavery forever. Not to say he would ever got that passed, but that's what he was proposing. We know in 1864, he was saying we ought to send all black people to Africa because we want an all-white country. That's Lincoln's words, not mine. And he wasn't talking about a voluntary deportation. He was talking about an involuntary deportation. Whether they want to go or not, we're going to take them and we're going to send them. That was his idea. Take them, send them on back to Africa. Of course, Lincoln was assassinated, so that never happened. Now, probably wouldn't have happened, but that's what he was proposing. You know, Lincoln, people got his statue everywhere. Okay. So really, you say they're traitors. But the Southerners say, well, how are we traitors? Because if you sign a contract, which the Constitution was a contract, then later on you decide, well, I don't want to follow the provisions of the contract. Why is that? I don't know. I just changed my mind. The Southerners, being all legal scholars as they were, like John C. Calhoun and all of them, Jefferson Davis, they're all legal scholars. They say, well, if you don't follow the provisions of the contract, what does that do to the contract? Oh, guess what? It voids the contract. The contract is void. There is no union. You can't pick and choose what you're going to follow. Even Andrew Jackson, the president from Tennessee, slave owner, was threatening South Carolina because they didn't want to follow the tariff. He said, you can't pick and choose what you want to follow. You can't just nullify things you don't like. So South Carolina decided in 1860, after Lincoln got elected, they kind of miscalculated, really, because they just thought all the Republicans were a gang of abolitionists. The abolitionists did tend to congregate in the Republican Party. There's no doubt about it. But Lincoln wasn't one of those. He was no abolitionist. He did not want to outlaw slavery. He didn't like slavery, but he wasn't going to do anything to outlaw it. except maybe say y'all ought to outlaw it, but he wasn't going to do anything about it. But they panicked. I made a video about that. Secession was a mistake. Still posted. So South Carolina decided, look, we cannot have this. You got this guy, John Brown, out here attacking Virginia. Then you got people in the North celebrating the man and making poetry about him. They don't want to return the slaves. They're openly saying they're going to let them come stay here and not follow the law. But that's it. We don't want to be part of this. If you don't follow the law, we out. We don't want to fight. We don't want a war. We're just getting out. Now, they knew there was going to be a war because they knew that they weren't going to let them leave. South Carolina and those other southern states knew they're not going to let you leave. They talk about a union and it's all voluntary and everything, but they're not going to let you leave. We know that. That's why Jefferson Davis, when he was, vice president, and when other Southerners were like head of the Department of Defense and everything, they were slowly moving military bases down south, quietly transferring munitions, cannons, armaments down south, because they knew. They said, look, when it's time to get out, and it's going to be time, we just got to get out. We've got to get out. Because these guys are not going to follow the Constitution. It's clear. By 1850, it's clear. They're not going to follow it. I don't care what they say. They're not going to follow it. We got to get out. They're not going to let us leave. That's clear. They're going to attack us. Some kind of way, by hook or crook, they're going to figure out some pretext. So they won't be armed, Am I clear by now? I think I'm very clear. Let's look at some comments. Yes, you're right, Kevin. Yeah, it's bull. He was not the big freedom guy. The South is not succeeded, but seceded. You mean seceded? Well, it was about race in a way. Well, let's not be ugly to each other now. We want to be very nice. I'm very polite to the left, they're not so polite to me. But I never believe in personal attacks. Just believe in the facts, sir. So what South Carolina decided to do, they say, look, remember back in 1788, we ratified the Constitution. Well, we're going to repeal that. We're going to repeal it. We voted to do it. Now we're repealing it. We're just getting out. We're repealing the Act of Union. And in fact, some of the states, not just Southern either, put provisions in the ratification of the Constitution that at any time they felt uneasy about it, they would get out. Texas, for instance. Texas very clearly stated that they could leave the United States at any point. They voluntarily joined, and we're going to voluntarily leave. Read it. Read the Constitution contract with Texas and the United States. Texas said we are voluntarily becoming a state because they were an independent country. And at any point, we don't want to be part of this. We're out. And the U.S. said, well, okay. They never figured they would actually leave. So South Carolina said, look, we're just going to repeal that. We're repealing what we did in 1788, and now we're an independent country. And so no hard feelings, no hard feelings. That's what they said. No hard feelings, we're going to leave. But thanks anyway. It didn't really work out, but thanks, And then immediately, or nearly immediately, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas said, we're going to get out too. We just think it's better to leave. We're going to get out. So as an independent country, they raised their own armies, made their own post office, made their own president, provisional, and then later official president, Senate, vice president, House of Representatives, Capitol, Montgomery, later Richmond, Virginia. And I said, we're just going to leave, no problem. Well, Lincoln was like, oh, no, you're not leaving. Now, President Buchanan, a Democrat, said, well, I don't think y'all should leave. I think it's illegal. But I'm not going to do anything to stop you because I don't think I can. I don't think the government can attack other states to make them stay part of the union. It'd be like saying, well, I love my wife, but if she tries to leave me, I'm going to kill her. you know, wouldn't really be exactly a perfect union, you know. So that's what James Buchanan was saying, the president. I don't want my wife to leave, meaning the southern states, but I'm not going to kill her because I love her. I guess they're leaving, you know, what can I do? They're leaving. Well, bye. Well, Lincoln was more aggressive, so he said, no, y'all can't leave. They said, well, we already left, you know, we left. You saying we can't leave, but we gone. We have our own government, you know, it's kind of like already done. So you try to find a pretext, you know. We have great comments. I can't keep up with all of them. It says, CS said, Monica, I don't know, they're fussing with each other. I don't even see Monica's opinion. They're going back and forth. I can't keep up with all that. Well, tariffs was part of it. You know, that's another argument. The South didn't like the high tariffs to protection. Tariffs are protection, you know, because they said that favored special interests. Tariffs should be for the whole country to raise revenue only, not for special interests, protecting northern industries. And there's a strong argument for that. You shouldn't have, because remember, the Constitution talks about the general welfare. The laws are supposed to be for the general welfare, to protect everyone, not laws for special interests. And that's a strong argument. Now, but Lincoln said, no, you're going to pay the tariffs. And they said, why would we pay tariffs to you? Because we're not part of your country anymore. You see, we left. And remember, the Lincoln cabinet was talking like, what could we do to make them come back? And one proposal was, well, maybe we could start a war with Great Britain some kind of way, and everybody would be unified to fight the British, and they'll all come back like a big happy family. We could find some pretext and start a war with Great Britain. And Lincoln said, I don't know if that would work, you know, but he was thinking about it, you know. He wasn't necessarily opposed to it, but then they found a perfect pretext. There was one fort, because the Confederate states, well, even before they were Confederate, before they formed their new union, the Confederacy, they started seizing all federal property, all forts, military establishments, which makes sense. If you're an independent country, you're going to secure the military establishments, seizing everything as much as they could. I don't think they were ever able to seize Key West, Florida, but they were seizing everything, which makes sense when Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, White Russia, Ukraine seceded from the Soviet Union. They immediately secured all the military assets. I mean, any country is going to do that. Nobody took issue with that, did they? No, of course not. But there was one fort left. We know Fort Sumter in South Carolina, Charleston Harbor, and that was a U.S. fort. So then Lincoln said, there's my pretext. Now, if I could somehow maneuver the Confederates into shooting at the fort, then we could make a big propaganda ploy and attack the South. He was very clever. You could be evil and clever, you know, at the same time. So he was very clever and devious. So he says, well, South Carolina said, we know that story. This is an old story. I don't even really need to tell that story. South Carolina told the United States, well, okay, I guess you need to evacuate the fort. And Lincoln very aggressively said, oh, no, that's American territory, U.S. territory. They said, no, it's not. It's in South Carolina. What are you talking about? What are you, crazy? We're going to take the fort. It's ours. He said, oh, no. And they fired on the ships trying to reprovision the fort. The U.S. Navy tried to go and send supplies, and they fired on the ships, very rightfully so. They said, well, why would we let foreign ships come into our harbor? The United States is a foreign country now. We are our own country. We seceded, just like when the United States seceded from Great Britain. What happened when the British ships showed up? They fought against them. But somehow the liberals today say that's okay. It's okay to secede from Great Britain, but it's not okay to secede from the United States. So you see, their morality is based on the whims of the day. We don't base our morality on the whims of the day. So Well, you know, Lincoln was very clever, and he knew the Southerners are very hot-headed, and kind of like they descended from the Cavaliers in England, which were very chivalrous and honorable, and you know, the type of people where if you threw the gauntlet down, they're going to pick it up. You know what I'm saying? Like Lincoln knew that about Southerners, that you could bait them. You know what I'm saying? Bait them into fighting by using very pointed insults. And unfortunately, South Carolina took the bait. Now, we know they should not have taken the bait. I said that in my secession video. They were obviously being baited to attack. I'm not saying the attack was unjustified. I would never say that, ever. I would never say that. They were justified to attack the fort in April 1861. There's no question about that. And even the commander of the fort, what was he telling the South Carolina government? He's saying, look, we almost out of food. You know, I mean, we can't last but 2 more days. We're going to have to leave. Just let it go. And then we'll leave, and then you got it. But, and maybe some of these South Carolina people were co-conspirators with Lincoln. I don't know, because do you have people planted inside of a government that want to spark a conflict? You could have that. They could have had moles working inside the Southern. I doubt it was that case, but it's plausible that they could have had people working inside the South Carolina government that were trying to help Lincoln spark a conflict. It's plausible. Agent provocateurs, agent provocateurs. Well, whatever the case, we know the rest of the story. And now for the rest of the story. You know the rest of the story. They fired on the fort and it surrendered, and really nobody got killed in the battle, except there was a powder magazine that blew up and a guy got killed in an accident, but it wasn't really from the fighting. And then Lincoln had his excuse, so he could go around. I say TV and radio, they didn't have that, but the newspapers, the South attacked us. The American flag's been fired upon. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And then he, you know, like it's a big incident, you know, even though you staged it. And so then they can call out 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. Well, of course, immediately once he did that, North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas say, oh, no, we didn't agree with the secession. We think it's foolish. We could work it out. Because they were more compromise-minded. Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, Maryland. Well, Maryland was thinking about seceding too, but they weren't allowed since their legislature was arrested by the army. You said, why didn't Maryland vote to secede? Because their legislature was arrested by the army and not allowed to meet. Same thing in Missouri. They would have seceded probably, almost assuredly. Yeah, that's democracy, right? But once Lincoln said he was going to attack the South with an invasion, that's when the other states said, oh, no. We wanted to compromise, but if you want to invade South Carolina, you're going to have to come through us. And you ain't coming through us without a war. So you screwed up, big boy. We didn't want it, but if you want it, you got it. So then the southern states resisted the attack. Now, I don't know how that's treason. Now, anybody that would come on the internet talking, oh, that's treason, that's treason. How's it treason? Doesn't even make any sense. Then all of the whole American Revolution was treason. Why do we have 4th of July off Saturday? Why are we celebrating that? That's more treason than the Confederacy, because they had taken an oath of allegiance to King George III, who never even did anything to him. So it's so laughable. It's so laughable. So and now they want to attack the statues. They were protecting slavery. You know, you have to literally have a child's mentality to believe that. A child's mentality. Why would you even bring that up? I mean, what is the relevance to that argument? Slavery was protected by the Constitution. I mean, I don't know. What are you talking about? They were protecting the Constitution. The Constitution said they could have it. If half the country is going to say you can't, you know, we're not going to follow the Constitution. Well, then there is no Constitution, right? It doesn't matter. We're out. We're leaving. This is clear as night and day. I don't think any sensible thinking person in this world, on this planet, could argue that. But you're welcome to come on. You got 30 minutes. But you're gonna be caught out looking very silly, I think. Okay. So okay, but these mobs want to go tearing down Robert E. Lee's statue, tearing down Andrew Jack, all these people, you know, Stonewall Jackson, Thomas Jackson, all great Americans, you know, fighting for their country, heroic patriots. They fought like gentlemen too. Now, you know, that's the ironic part. They fought a gentleman, which was a mistake, as we found out. They want to fight a gentleman's war. Go out, fight the battle, you know, pitch battle, the rules of war and all this. Whereas Lincoln, he wasn't going to fight fair. You know, Lincoln wasn't going to fight fair. He authorized attacks on civilians. He authorized trying to start a slave uprising. He authorized all these illegal activities. Of course, you could say he paid for it, you know what I mean? But he's the one that wanted to do the war crimes, attacking civilians and all of this. So why, you know, if any statue should be torn down, it's his, you know. People always say, oh, the Lincoln Memorial. I went to that memorial. I didn't sit there and give homage to it. I just looked at it. I said, yeah, there's that. You know what I said? Me and my friend Paul went to that. I said, there's that. You know, of course, I said a string of derogatory terms, but I'm not a crazy radical Marxist communist terrorist. I just looked at the statue with contempt, you know. I didn't make a big thing out of it. I just went there and I'm looking at all these other people honoring. They're like, oh, this great man. I said, why don't they have Pol Pot's statue up? You know, or a Ho Chi Minh or somebody, you know, it's like that makes me. But anyway, you know, I don't make a big deal out of it. Okay, so like I said in the last video, tear all the statues down. I don't care. I mean, I care, but I don't care because in the sense that there's still Confederate monuments in every northern state. Every single northern state, Iowa, Minnesota, you know, Nebraska, Maine, Vermont, they have Confederate monuments in every town. I know I've been up to every state except for 2. I hadn't been to Alaska and Hawaii. You go to any town, Ronald Sutton's watching, go to Ohio, go to any town, and they got a statue, and it is an honor. It's a statue in honor of Confederate marksmanship. I've been up there. They say, oh, this statue honors so-and-so unit who they died at the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, that's a monument to Confederate marksmanship. You know, so if I go up to Ohio or whatever the state, Illinois, and I see the monument, I say, yeah, look. Our people did that. That's a Confederate monument. They were good shoot. They were good. Hey, I'm a good shot. You know, they lost 3. You know, the United States want to do these terrible things, attacking the South, lose over 300,000 people, over 300,000 men who could have stayed home with their family, their wife, their children, their mother, their father. And look at them. They all got killed for what? For no reason. It's terrible. You know, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. War is a terrible thing. All these 300,000 men getting killed. Why? Because they were in a place they did not need to be. They got fixed up, more or less you could say they got fixed up. And they built monuments to the Confederate marksmanship all over the North. So next time you're driving through Findlay, Ohio, or Brooklyn, New York. I know in Brooklyn there's a big Union statue honoring Confederate marksmen. You say, oh yeah, could have stayed home and got fixed up. And that's terrible. 300,000, over 300,000 young men getting blown up, shot up, killed up, fixed up, going to a place they didn't need to be. Now you think about it along those lines, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Okay. Sherman burnt, yeah, Sherman. Terrible man, a very terrible man. Tom McLovin says, oh, there's so many comments I can't keep up. I need to start listening to Ron's historical videos just to educate myself. I will give it time and focus. I used to listen to Terrence McKenna lectures. Some of them are 11 hours long. I don't want to make this much longer than, it's already an hour and 20 minutes is too long. Well, I think I did fine. I didn't state any opinions, really. When you think about it, I didn't state any opinions. I just gave facts. The Constitution protected slavery. Now, do I think that's good? Well, not necessarily. Would have been nice if we wouldn't have had slavery. Wish we wouldn't have had it. Wish it would have never occurred, you know. But I wasn't around in 1788. They had it. The northern states allowed it. There wasn't any way they could stop it, because if they would have said you can't have it, the South would have never joined the United States to start with. So the whole moral of the story is, don't let people into your country and then change the game on them later on. Don't say, well, you can have that. Fine, come on in. And then 60 years later say, oh, well, we changed our mind. You can't have that. That's when the South said, well, if you switch the game up on us, we're going to leave, which is justifiable. Obviously, it's not even really an opinion. I wouldn't change the game on you, you know? Okay. Oh, they're going on about prices and everything you ever heard of. Hot topic. You ever hear of that story? Okay, I hear that the Grinder says, Grinders, I hear that the Confederate flag represents slavery and racism. Is that true? Well, it's true to simple-minded people that don't know history. It's how you frame a story. Of course, it doesn't represent either thing, but, you know, if you don't know anything about history, how can you talk about history? You know, you got to know something. You know what I mean? More soldiers died. Yeah, I don't know about that, Ronald. A lot of them did die of disease. You know. Bruce says Ron makes me miss South Louisiana. Simon Smith said, Ronald, do you think our country will stay united over the next 10 years? Maybe. I don't know. It's a 50-50 thing, I guess. To some ignorant people, the American flag means terrible things too. Well, it might mean that, because if you think about it for a minute, the United States flag flew over slavery from 1776 until 1865. The United States flag and Constitution protected slavery. Slavery was legal. So when you look at the stars and stripes and you think about it using logic, the stars and stripes was a slave emblem. And that's a fact. The Fugitive Slave Act applied to all the states. The provision in the Constitution that I just read about slaves had to be returned to their home state applied to all states. So I suppose we could say the United States Constitution and flag represent slavery. Makes sense, doesn't it? Of course it makes sense. There's only way you can look at it. It's the only logical way you can look at it. I mean, you could pretend, and these people get on here talking about Democrats and Republicans. I'm so tired of hearing about Democrats and Republicans. It makes me sick. But anyway, that's the clear-cut answer. I think I made it very clear. I know I made it clear here. Oh, they're going off on any kind of thing now. So anyway, thanks for watching this video production. I made it very clear that they weren't traitors. That's obvious. Very obvious. The Confederate leaders were not traitors. If anybody was a traitor to his country, it would be Lincoln, you know, Abraham Lincoln attacking other states, trying to foment a war, trying to bait people into going to war. That's how you get, that's how you commit a war crime and a capital crime. That's a capital offense, you know, trying to start a war. That's really a war crime. That's what Nuremberg trials and such thing like that are for, you know, start being very evil, you know, being a very evil person. So no, I'm not a Lincoln guy, to say the least. But anyway, thanks for watching this video production. I think I 100% backed up my point. If you think I didn't, you can come on here and counterpoint me, but I'm pretty sure I did. Teaching history, well, you can do that because students are independent. A lot of students are independent thinkers, and they can read different documents, you know. And then, boy, if you start reading that Constitution, ooh, you might upset your teacher. And a lot of students are smarter than the teacher may believe. All right, thanks for watching this video production, and y'all take care now.